The day my parents told me I was adopted, my whole world collapsed. I was 34 years old when they looked me in the eyes and said, "Emily, you're not really our daughter." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Every birthday, every Christmas, every family photo, every memory I had suddenly felt like a lie. Then my father slid a folder across the dining table. Inside was what looked like adoption paperwork. He told me I had no legal claim to our family's estate, and that everything would go to my younger brother after he passed away. I believed them. I packed a small suitcase that same night. I thought I had lost my family forever. But 3 weeks later, one unexpected phone call from a DNA laboratory destroyed every lie they had spent years building. The DNA test didn't just prove I was their biological daughter. It exposed the biggest family betrayal our town had ever seen. By the time the truth came out, my parents weren't fighting to protect an inheritance anymore. They were begging me not to take everything they had tried to steal. My name is Emily Carter, and this is the story of how the people who raised me tried to erase me from my own family, until science exposed a secret they never thought anyone would discover. I was 29 years old when my parents looked me in the eyes and calmly told me that I had never really belonged to them. The strange part wasn't hearing those words. It was the look on my older brother Daniel's face while they said them. He wasn't shocked. He wasn't confused. He looked relieved, as though he had been waiting years for that exact moment. If I had walked away right then, maybe I would have believed them. Maybe I would have packed my bags, accepted their story, and disappeared from the only family I had ever known. But one envelope, one DNA test, and one sentence from my late grandmother changed everything. Because it wasn't me who had been living a lie. It was them. And by the time the truth finally came out, everything they had built on those lies came crashing down. My name is Emily Carter. I grew up in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. My father, Richard Carter, owned a successful construction company that my grandfather had started nearly 50 years earlier. My mother, Linda, had never worked outside the home. She dedicated her life to taking care of the family, hosting church dinners, organizing neighborhood events, and making sure everyone believed we were the perfect American family. Then there was my brother, Daniel, 3 years older than me, confident, popular, the kind of person who always found a way to become everyone's favorite. Growing up, I admired him. At least I tried to. But it never seemed to matter how hard I worked. Daniel was always treated differently. If he forgot an important appointment, "He has so much responsibility. If I forgot one, you've always been careless." If Daniel wanted something expensive, Dad called it an investment. If I asked for something much smaller, Mom called it unnecessary. Little by little, I convinced myself that this was simply how families worked. Someone was always the favorite. Someone else learned to accept second place. I chose peace over questions. After college, I became a financial analyst. I loved numbers because numbers never lied. Balance sheets either matched or they didn't. Unlike people. I bought my own townhouse, paid off my student loans, never asked my parents for money again. I still visited every Sunday, every birthday, every Thanksgiving, because despite everything, they were still my family, or at least, I believed they were. Everything changed after Grandma Margaret passed away. She was my father's mother, and if there was one person in that family who made me feel completely loved, it was her. Grandma never compared me to Daniel. She celebrated every achievement equally. When I graduated college, she hugged me longer than anyone else. When I bought my first home, she cried before I did. She always whispered the same words whenever she saw me. "Never doubt where you belong." At the time, I thought she meant emotionally. Years later, I realized she meant something far more important. After her funeral, the family gathered back at my parents' house. Everyone looked exhausted. The dining room still smelled faintly of lilies from the funeral arrangements. Paper plates covered the kitchen island. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles. Children ran through the backyard without understanding why all the adults looked so sad. Late that evening, after most guests had gone home, I walked into the living room. Dad, Mom, and Daniel were already sitting there. No television, no coffee, no small talk, just silence. Dad finally cleared his throat. Emily, there is something we've needed to tell you. I smiled weakly. What is it? Mom refused to look at me. Instead, Daniel stared directly into my face. Dad folded his hands together. You aren't our biological daughter. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it sounded impossible. What? You were adopted. The room became completely silent. I looked from one face to another, waiting for someone to smile, to admit it was some horrible misunderstanding. No one did. Mom finally spoke. We always planned to tell you. But the timing never felt right. I could barely breathe. I have a birth certificate. Dad nodded. It was reissued. I have baby pictures. So do many adopted children. My medical records. We handled everything legally. Every answer came too quickly, almost rehearsed, like they had practiced this conversation. I looked toward Daniel. He leaned back in his chair, avoiding eye contact now. Not surprised, not emotional, just comfortable. That was the moment something inside me shifted. Not because of what Dad said, because of how Daniel reacted. If this were true, wouldn't he be shocked too? Wouldn't he have questions? Instead, he looked like someone watching the final scene of a movie he'd already seen. Mom reached across the coffee table. We still love you. You'll always be family. But that one word echoed through the room. But? Dad inhaled deeply. Since Grandma passed away, there will be legal matters involving the estate. My heartbeat slowed. Finally, the real reason. Dad continued. The family business has always stayed with blood relatives. I stared at him. So? Daniel finally spoke. If you're adopted, Grandma's inheritance legally belongs to me. There it was. Not grief, not honesty, money, property, control. I looked around the room again. Every piece suddenly fit together. Grandma had passed away only 3 days earlier, and somehow, they had already prepared this conversation, not because they wanted me to know the truth, because they wanted me gone before the will was read. I stood slowly. I need air. Nobody stopped me. Nobody hugged me. Nobody followed me outside. I sat alone on the porch for nearly an hour, trying to remember my childhood, searching for clues, anything. Had I ever seen adoption papers? No. Had Grandma ever treated me differently? Never. Had anyone outside the family ever hinted I was adopted? Not once. Something felt terribly wrong. When I finally drove home that night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, I opened every family photo album I owned, every birthday, every Christmas, every school event. I searched every picture, looking for something, anything, that proved I belonged. At 3 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. There was no greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. Before you believe them, get a DNA test. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard my mother's voice again. Emily, you're not really our daughter. The sentence echoed through my head like a song that refused to end. At 3 in the morning, I walked downstairs. The house was completely silent. The same house where I had learned to walk. The same hallway where my father had measured my height every birthday with a black marker. The same kitchen where my mother used to bake cinnamon rolls every Sunday morning. Now every memory felt fake. I stood in front of the family photo wall. There were dozens of pictures. My first day of kindergarten, family vacations, Christmas mornings, my high school graduation, my college degree, my wedding. No, there wasn't a wedding picture, because there had never been one. I had never married. After spending years taking care of my parents while my younger brother Daniel chased business opportunities across the country, relationships simply never lasted. My family had always been my priority. At least, that's what I believed. Until tonight. I picked up one framed photograph. It showed my father carrying me on his shoulders at the county fair. I couldn't have been older than 5. His smile looked real. His arms around me looked real. So why? Why would he suddenly tell me I wasn't his daughter? Behind me, I heard footsteps. My mother entered the kitchen wearing her robe. She looked tired, older somehow. For a moment, I hoped she would say they had made a terrible mistake. Instead, she quietly poured herself a cup of tea. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I asked the question that had been burning inside me. When were you planning to tell me? She kept staring into her cup. We never wanted to. Then why now? Another long silence. Finally, she whispered, because your father thought it was time. That answer made no sense. What changed? She looked toward the dining room where the folder still sat on the table. The inheritance. There it was again. The inheritance. For weeks, that word had come up more and more often. Ever since my grandfather passed away 6 months earlier, our family owned more than most people realized. Not enormous wealth, but enough. The family home, nearly 200 acres of farmland leased to local farmers, several investment accounts, my grandfather's antique collection. Everything together was worth several $1,000,000. Growing up, my father always said, "One day, this stays in the family." Apparently, I no longer counted as family. The next morning, my younger brother Daniel arrived. He walked into the house carrying coffee as though nothing unusual had happened. He smiled at me. "Morning, Em." I simply stared at him. "You knew." He froze. His smile disappeared. "You knew," I repeated. He rubbed the back of his neck. "I only found out a few weeks ago." "And you believed them?" "They showed me the paperwork." Paperwork. Everyone kept mentioning paperwork. But no one actually let me keep it. I walked to the dining room. The folder was gone. "So where is it?" Daniel looked confused. "What?" "The adoption papers." Dad answered before Daniel could. "I put them away." "I want copies." His expression hardened immediately. "Those documents are private." I laughed. Actually laughed. "My own adoption papers are private?" "They're family records." "I am the family." Nobody answered. That silence told me more than words ever could. Over the next several days, everything changed. My parents stopped asking me to stay for dinner. Conversations ended whenever I entered a room. Daniel suddenly became involved in every financial discussion, something he had never cared about before. One afternoon, I overheard him talking with Dad in the garage. "Once Emily moves out." Moves out? Nobody had even discussed me leaving. I stood outside the half-open garage door listening. Dad lowered his voice. "The sooner everything is transferred, the safer we are." Transferred? Transferred to whom? Daniel noticed me first. His eyes widened. Dad immediately stopped talking. "What are you doing?" he asked sharply. "I live here. For now." Those 2 words landed harder than anything else. For now. After 34 years. This wasn't my home anymore. That evening I packed one suitcase. Not because they had officially asked me to leave, because I couldn't stay somewhere I was no longer wanted. As I carried my suitcase downstairs, my mother began crying. "Emily." I looked at her. "If you wanted me to stay, you should have told me the truth." She covered her mouth but said nothing. Dad remained standing near the front door, completely expressionless. Daniel avoided looking at me altogether. No one tried to stop me. Not one person. I placed my house key on the hallway table. I hope, I said quietly, whoever inherits this house loves it as much as I did. Then I walked away. For the next 2 weeks, I stayed in a small furnished apartment across town. My best friend Sarah helped me move. She kept asking questions. I couldn't answer most of them, because none of it made sense. One evening, we sat on her balcony watching the sunset. She finally asked, "Emily, have you actually seen proof?" "What do you mean?" "The adoption papers. They showed me." "Showed you, or let you examine them?" I stopped, because she was right. I'd only seen them for a few seconds. My father held the folder. He turned the pages. Then he closed it again. I had never touched the documents myself, never read every page, never photographed them. Nothing. Sarah leaned forward. "Did you ever need a birth certificate growing up?" "Of course." "Who kept it?" "My parents." "Have you ever seen the original?" Again. No. Whenever I needed identification. My father handled everything. Passport applications, driver's license, college enrollment. He always brought whatever documents were necessary. I never questioned it. Why would I? He was my father. Sarah folded her arms. "Emily, something doesn't feel right." For the first time, I admitted something to myself. It didn't feel right to me either. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was balancing invoices at work. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. "Hello? Is this Emily Carter?" "Yes." "My name is Rebecca. I'm calling from Dominion Genetic Laboratory." I frowned. "I think you've got the wrong person." "Were you recently listed as a possible biological relative during a family DNA submission?" My heart skipped. "No." Rebecca sounded confused. "That's strange. There appears to have been paperwork listing your contact information." "What paperwork?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss details over the phone." I gripped the desk. "Can you at least tell me why you're calling?" There was a pause. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Someone submitted DNA claiming you are not biologically related to your parents." The room suddenly felt smaller. "But," Rebecca continued carefully, "our preliminary laboratory findings do not support that claim." I stopped breathing. "What did you just say?" "I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. That's all I'm authorized to tell you over the phone." The call ended. I remained frozen in my office chair. One sentence repeated inside my head. Our laboratory findings do not support that claim. Not support the claim. Someone had tested my DNA without telling me, and the results didn't match the story my parents had told. For the first time since leaving home, I realized something terrifying. Maybe I wasn't searching for my real family at all. Maybe my real family had been lying to me from the very beginning. For almost 10 minutes after the call ended, I couldn't move. The invoice on my computer screen blurred in front of me. Only one thought kept repeating in my head. Who ordered a DNA test, and why? I hadn't submitted one. I had never mailed a saliva sample. I had never even considered taking one. Yet someone had tested my DNA, and according to the laboratory, the results didn't support my parents' claim that I wasn't their biological daughter. That meant one of two things. Either the lab had made a mistake, or my parents had. Deep down, I already knew which possibility frightened me more. That evening, I drove straight to Sarah's apartment. The moment she opened the door, she knew something had happened. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I got a phone call. She handed me a cup of coffee before I even finished speaking. We sat at her kitchen table while I repeated every word the laboratory employee had said. Sarah listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back slowly. "So someone wanted scientific proof that you weren't their daughter." "Apparently." "And science said otherwise." I nodded. She stared at me for several seconds. "Emily." "What?" I think your parents expected the DNA test to support their story. The thought made my stomach twist. If they were lying, they probably believed nobody would ever check. The next morning, I called the laboratory. This time, they transferred me to the legal department. I'm sorry, the woman explained politely. Because the test was requested by another party, we cannot release the complete report without proper authorization. So someone actually requested it? Yes. Who? I'm not allowed to disclose that information. I closed my eyes. Can you tell me one thing? She hesitated. Were my parents involved? I'm sorry, Ms. Carter. I can't answer that. The silence itself felt like an answer. That afternoon, I searched for a family attorney. Not a divorce lawyer, not a criminal lawyer. Someone who specialized in inheritance disputes. After several phone calls, I found attorney Rebecca Lawson, a woman with nearly 30 years of experience handling estate fraud and probate cases. Her office overlooked downtown Richmond. No expensive decorations, no dramatic leather chairs, just shelves filled with legal books and organized files. She listened quietly while I explained everything: the adoption claim, the inheritance, the mysterious DNA test. When I finally finished, she folded her hands. Emily, I've handled difficult families before. But this, she shook her head. This is unusual. What should I do? Her answer came immediately. First, stop assuming anything. I frowned. What do you mean? You've accepted two things without proof. What? First, that you're adopted. And second, that the inheritance legally belongs to someone else. She opened a yellow legal pad. We verify facts. We don't trust stories. She made a list. Original birth certificate, hospital birth records, state vital records, medical files, property documents, grandfather's will, every document connected to my birth or the estate. Then she looked at me. Have your parents ever shown you an original birth certificate? No. Then that's where we start. 3 days later, Rebecca called. I have your certified birth record. I drove to her office immediately. She placed a sealed envelope on the desk. This came directly from the Virginia Department of Health. My hands trembled as I opened it. There it was, my birth certificate. Mother, Margaret Carter. Father, William Carter. No adoption. No amended record. No sealed replacement certificate. Nothing. Rebecca quietly slid another document beside it. This confirms the hospital where you were born, the attending physician, the delivery records, the footprints, the birth registration number. Everything matched. Everything. I stared at the papers for nearly a minute. Then one sentence escaped my mouth. So, they lied. Rebecca didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, It appears they did. I drove straight to my parents' house. Not because Rebecca recommended it. She actually advised me to wait. But I couldn't. I needed to hear the truth. Dad answered the door. He looked surprised. What are you doing here? I held up the birth certificate. This says I'm your daughter. His face changed. Only slightly, but enough. He recovered almost instantly. Those records must be incorrect. I laughed in disbelief. The state is wrong? The hospital is wrong? My birth certificate is wrong? He folded his arms. Paperwork gets mixed up. I took one step closer. No, people lie. Behind him, my mother appeared in the hallway. She looked terrified. Not angry, not defensive. Terrified. Dad? I asked quietly. Why? For a split second, I thought he might tell me. Instead, he slammed the door. I stood there for several moments, listening. Inside, I heard shouting. Not from my father, from my mother. For the first time in my life, she was yelling at him. I couldn't make out every word, only fragments. Never should have. I told you. She knows. Then silence. I walked back to my car with more questions than answers. The following week brought another surprise. Rebecca called again. This time, I need you to come in immediately. When I arrived, she already had several files spread across her desk. One document was highlighted. What am I looking at? She pointed to a date. Your grandfather updated his will. I nodded. I knew that. No. She looked directly at me. I don't think you did. She handed me the certified copy. The amendment had been signed, only 8 months before grandfather died. I scanned the page, then stopped. My own name appeared first. Emily Carter, beneficiary. Equal ownership of the family home. Equal ownership of the farmland. Equal investment rights. Equal authority over family assets. I looked up. This? Rebecca nodded. Your grandfather specifically named you. What about Daniel? He inherited his share. So why would my parents tell me I wasn't entitled to anything? Rebecca didn't answer. Instead, she slid one final document across the table. This was filed 2 months after your grandfather passed away. I looked closer. My heart nearly stopped. It was a petition requesting that I be removed as a legal beneficiary. Reason: not biological family. Applicant: William Carter, my own father. I couldn't speak. My father hadn't simply lied. He had officially tried to erase me. Legally. Rebecca broke the silence. Emily, I believe someone intended to use fraudulent documents during probate. Can they do that? They can try. And if they're caught? She looked me straight in the eyes. The consequences are serious. That evening, my phone buzzed. Daniel. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. His voice sounded nervous. Emily, we need to talk. I'm listening. Not on the phone. Why? Because Dad doesn't know I'm calling. That got my attention. When? Tomorrow. Coffee shop on Jefferson Street. Then he hung up. The next afternoon, he arrived 20 minutes late. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking. He sat down without ordering anything. Finally, he whispered, I didn't know everything. I stared at him. What does that mean? I knew they wanted the inheritance. I knew they said you were adopted. But, his voice cracked, I didn't know the paperwork was fake. Every sound in the cafe seemed to disappear. What paperwork? Daniel swallowed hard. I watched Dad make it. I felt my heartbeat pound inside my ears. What did you just say? He bought old adoption forms online, changed dates, copied signatures, and told me nobody would ever question it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Daniel reached into his backpack. I brought something. He placed a small flash drive on the table. I copied Dad's computer before leaving home. What's on it? His answer changed everything. Every draft. Every fake document. And every email he thought nobody would ever see. I looked at the flash drive, realizing my family's biggest secret was no longer hidden. For several long seconds, I simply stared at the flash drive lying on the coffee shop table. It looked ordinary, cheap, the kind of thing people carried in their pockets without thinking twice. Yet Daniel was looking at it as though it weighed 100 pounds. I copied everything, he said quietly. I didn't know what else to do. I finally looked at him. When? The night after you left the house. You knew something was wrong? He nodded. I heard Mom crying. What did she say? Daniel swallowed. She kept telling Dad, this has gone too far. And Dad kept saying, it's too late to turn back now. A chill ran through me. Whatever had started as a lie had become something much bigger. I drove straight to Rebecca Lawson's office. She plugged the flash drive into a secure computer. Neither of us spoke while hundreds of folders appeared on the screen. Financial records, property transfers, estate planning, personal. Then, one folder caught Rebecca's attention. Adoption documents. She clicked it. Inside were dozens of files, different versions, different dates, different signatures, each one claiming I had been adopted. Rebecca opened the document properties. Then she looked at me. This file was created only 9 months ago. I stared at the screen. But it says 1992. She nodded. The document says 1992. The computer says last year. Someone hadn't found adoption papers. Someone had manufactured them. Rebecca continued opening file after file. Each discovery was worse than the last. There were scanned signatures, edited certificates, fake legal stamps, even templates downloaded from the internet. Finally, she leaned back. This isn't misunderstanding. This isn't confusion. This is deliberate fraud. I felt sick. My own father had spent months creating evidence to erase me from the family. Then Rebecca opened another folder. Emails. Hundreds of them. Most were ordinary, but one subject line immediately stood out. Estate distribution plan. She opened it. The sender was my father. The recipient was an accountant I had never heard of. The email read, "If Emily can legally be removed before probate is completed, Daniel receives full ownership without contest." My hands began shaking. Rebecca kept reading. Another email. The adoption story should prevent unnecessary legal complications. Another. Margaret is becoming emotional. Convince her to stay quiet. I closed my eyes. Mom had known. Maybe she hadn't wanted this, but she had gone along with it. Rebecca printed every document. Then she turned toward me. "I believe we've crossed into criminal territory. What happens now?" "We preserve everything. We notify the probate court. And we prepare for the possibility that your parents deny every word." They didn't have to wait long. The following afternoon, Dad called, for the first time in weeks. His voice sounded unusually calm. "Emily." "What?" "I think we should talk." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone." "I've heard that before." Silence. Finally, he sighed. "Come to the house." Against Rebecca's advice, I went. Nothing inside had changed. The old clock still ticked in the hallway. Mom's flowers still sat beside the kitchen window. Family photographs still covered the walls. Only now, they felt like decorations in someone else's home. Dad was waiting in the dining room. Mom sat beside him. Her eyes were swollen from crying. No one spoke for almost a minute. Finally, Dad broke the silence. "I know you've been asking questions. I already have answers." His jaw tightened. "Daniel betrayed this family." "No," I said calmly. "He protected it." Dad slammed his hand against the table. "You have no idea what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing." I opened my briefcase, placed copies of the fake adoption papers on the table, then the email printouts, then the birth certificate. Dad's face lost its color. Mom covered her mouth. Neither of them touched the papers. "I have one question," I said. "When did you decide I wasn't your daughter anymore?" Dad looked away. Mom started crying harder. "Finally," she whispered. "Please stop." I turned toward her. "No. I've spent 34 years believing you loved me. If that wasn't true, I deserve to know when it changed." Mom suddenly stood. "It never changed." The room fell silent. She was trembling. "I've always loved you." "Then why?" She looked at my father. For several painful seconds, she said nothing. Then, she whispered the words that changed everything. Because your father believed Daniel deserved everything. I stared at her. What? She nodded through tears. After Grandpa updated the will, your father became obsessed. He couldn't accept that the estate was divided equally. He believed the family business should stay with a son. I looked slowly toward Dad. He didn't deny it. Not once. You told everyone boys should carry the family name, Mom continued. When Grandpa refused to change the will, your father decided to change the story instead. The room became impossibly quiet. Every memory from my childhood suddenly made sense. Every time Dad insisted Daniel should learn about the farm. Every time I was told, that's men's work. Every holiday where Daniel received responsibility, while I received compliments. I had mistaken favoritism for old-fashioned thinking. It had been preparation. Preparation for the day he intended to erase me completely. You forged legal documents, I said quietly. You lied to your own daughter. You tried to steal my inheritance. Because I wasn't your son? Dad finally spoke. You would have married someday. So? The property would leave the Carter family. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I've spent my entire life protecting this family. I cared for Grandpa. I stayed here. I gave up promotions. I postponed relationships. I missed opportunities. And somehow, I'm the outsider? He looked at me with complete certainty. A daughter eventually belongs to another family. The sentence hit harder than any insult he had ever spoken. Mom burst into tears. William, stop. But he kept going. I did what any father should do. No, I answered. You did what a selfish man does when greed becomes more important than love. I picked up the papers, walked toward the front door. Before leaving, I looked at my mother. You still have time. She looked up. Time for what? To tell the whole truth. Then I walked away. The next morning, Rebecca officially submitted the evidence to the probate court. Every forged document, every email, every financial record, every digital timestamp. By afternoon, our case had become much bigger than inheritance. The court ordered a forensic examination of every document my father had submitted. 3 days later, the report came back. Every signature had been digitally copied. Every adoption document was fraudulent. Every date had been altered. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca smiled for the first time since we'd met. They can't explain this away. But just as I began believing the nightmare was finally ending, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice was barely audible. Emily, I have to tell you something. Before your father does. What is it? There was a long silence. Then she whispered. The lie didn't start with the inheritance. My heart stopped. It started 28 years ago. I didn't sleep that night. My mother's final words echoed through my mind. The lie didn't start with the inheritance. It started 28 years ago. I kept wondering what could possibly be worse than everything I had already learned. The fake adoption papers, the forged signatures, the stolen inheritance. Surely there couldn't be another secret. I was wrong. The next morning my mother called again. Her voice sounded exhausted. Can we meet somewhere your father won't know? I hesitated. After everything that had happened, trusting anyone in my family felt impossible. Finally, I agreed. We met at a quiet botanical garden outside Richmond. It was a place she used to take me every spring when I was little. Back then, she would buy me ice cream, and we'd spend hours feeding ducks by the lake. Walking through those same gardens now felt strangely painful. She was already sitting on a wooden bench when I arrived. For the first time in my life, my mother looked afraid of me. Not because I might yell, because she knew she had to tell the truth. She didn't begin speaking immediately. Instead, she stared across the pond where a pair of swans drifted silently across the water. Finally, she whispered, I've been a coward. I sat beside her without saying anything. For 28 years, I chose peace over honesty. She looked at me with tears filling her eyes. And in doing that, I almost lost my daughter. I swallowed hard. What happened 28 years ago? She closed her eyes. When your grandfather became sick. I frowned. Grandpa? She nodded. He started preparing his estate. I remember. No, she shook her head. You don't. You were only 6. She reached into her purse and removed an old photograph. The edges were faded. Grandpa stood in front of the farmhouse. Beside him was little Emily. Me, holding a fishing pole almost taller than I was. He adored you. I know. No, she smiled sadly. You don't understand. He adored you because he believed you reminded him of his own mother. She pointed toward the picture. You followed him everywhere. You learned how to repair fences. You planted vegetables with him. You listened when he talked. Then she looked down. Daniel never cared. That wasn't entirely true. Daniel loved Grandpa, but he had always preferred sports, friends, and later business. I was the one who stayed behind, the one who helped. One afternoon, Mom continued, your grandfather called your father into his office. He told him, Emily understands responsibility. One day she'll protect this family better than anyone. I could almost hear Grandpa saying it. Those words sounded exactly like him. What did Dad say? She laughed bitterly. Nothing. Not in front of Grandpa. But that night, her face tightened. He exploded. She remembered every word. He said, a daughter shouldn't inherit the Carter legacy. The farm belongs to a son. That's how it's always been. Mom had argued with him. She reminded him that Grandpa could leave his property to whoever he wanted. Dad refused to accept it. For years, he kept believing Grandpa would eventually change his mind. He never did. When Grandpa updated his final will last year, Mom continued, your father realized he had lost. So he created another plan. I already knew part of that plan. The fake adoption, the forged documents. But there was more. Much more. My mother handed me another envelope. I found these hidden in your father's workshop. Inside were handwritten notes, legal checklists, names of attorneys, property values, timelines. Each page was covered in calculations. One sentence had been circled several times. Remove Emily before probate closes. Below it, another note. Daniel receives everything automatically. I stared at the handwriting. Dad's handwriting. This hadn't been a desperate decision. It had been a strategy, months, maybe years, in the making. I wanted to burn those papers, Mom whispered. But I couldn't. Why not? Because someday, I thought you might need proof. I looked at her. If you knew all this, why didn't you stop him? She lowered her head. I tried. Not enough. The honesty hurt. But you're right. I wasn't brave enough. I kept believing he'd come to his senses. Instead, he kept going deeper. A tear rolled down her cheek. The biggest regret of my life is watching my husband become someone I no longer recognized. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound came from birds moving through the trees. Finally, I asked, does Daniel know all of this? She nodded slowly. He discovered the truth only a few weeks before you did. He argued with your father every day. He told him to stop. I remembered how nervous Daniel had looked, how guilty he seemed. Maybe he wasn't pretending after all. That evening, Rebecca reviewed the new evidence. She carefully examined every handwritten page, every timeline, every note. Then she looked at me. This changes the case. How? It proves intent. She explained that mistakes happen, confusion happens, even missing paperwork happens, but detailed planning was something entirely different. This shows your father knowingly attempted to remove a legal heir. She placed the notes into an evidence folder. The judge needs to see every page. 2 weeks later, the probate hearing finally arrived. It wasn't dramatic. No television cameras, no reporters, just lawyers, family members, court staff, and years of secrets waiting to be uncovered. Dad arrived wearing his favorite navy suit, the same one he'd worn to my college graduation. For a brief second, seeing him dressed so normally made everything feel unreal. How could the man who taught me to ride a bicycle also be the man sitting across the courtroom? The judge patiently reviewed the documents, the forged adoption papers, the birth certificate, the forensic report, the emails, the financial records, the handwritten plans. One by one, each piece fit perfectly into the next. Dad's attorney argued there had been misunderstandings, administrative errors, confusion over estate planning. Rebecca calmly responded by displaying the computer metadata, creation dates, editing history, digital timestamps. Every lie had left fingerprints. Then came the moment nobody expected. Rebecca called my mother to testify. Dad turned toward her. His expression wasn't angry. It was pleading, almost begging. For years, Mom had protected him. Today, she finally stopped. She took the witness stand, raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth. Then she looked directly at the judge. My husband knew Emily was our biological daughter. Every sound disappeared. He instructed me to remain silent. He created false adoption papers. He planned to remove Emily from my father's estate. Dad slowly closed his eyes. He didn't interrupt. He couldn't. Then Mom said something that even I didn't know. The night before Emily left home, my husband asked me to sign another document. Rebecca handed her a copy. Did you sign it? No. Why not? Because... She looked toward me. It declared Emily had voluntarily given up every inheritance right. The courtroom became silent again. Dad hadn't only planned to erase me. He had planned to create evidence, claiming I agreed. Rebecca stood. No further questions. Dad's attorney didn't even cross-examine her. There was nothing left to challenge. The truth had finally reached daylight. As everyone prepared to leave for a short recess, Dad quietly spoke for the first time that day. Not to the judge, not to the attorneys, to me. I never hated you. I looked at him. I know. You just loved the inheritance more. His shoulders collapsed. For the first time, he had no argument left, no explanation, no excuse, only silence. The courthouse hallway was almost empty. For nearly 2 years, my parents had insisted I wasn't their real daughter. They had convinced relatives, neighbors, even family friends that I had no legal or emotional claim to our family's legacy. But now everything depended on one final hearing. As I stood beside my attorney, Daniel Hayes, I looked across the room. My mother avoided my eyes. My father stared at the floor. And my brother Ethan, he still looked confident. He whispered something to his lawyer before smiling. He honestly believed he was about to win. Daniel leaned toward me. Whatever happens, he said quietly, remember, the truth has already won. I nodded. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid anymore. The judge entered. Everyone stood. The hearing began with financial evidence. Daniel carefully presented every document: the forged adoption story, the fake hospital records, the altered family files, the illegal transfer attempts, the hidden trust accounts. Then came the DNA report. The courtroom became completely silent. Daniel placed the original laboratory documents before the judge. Your Honor, he said calmly, independent testing confirms that Emily Carter is the biological daughter of Robert and Susan Carter. The judge studied every page carefully. Then he looked toward my parents. Do you dispute these findings? My father's attorney slowly stood. No, Your Honor. One sentence. Years of lies. Destroyed. But Daniel wasn't finished. There is one more issue. He projected several bank records onto the courtroom screen. Transfers, withdrawals, property sales, trust account activity. Every dollar Ethan had quietly moved after convincing everyone I wasn't part of the family. The judge frowned. When were these transfers made? Daniel answered. Immediately after the defendants began telling relatives that Emily had been adopted. The judge looked directly at Ethan. So you financially benefited from this false story? Ethan swallowed. It wasn't like that. The judge interrupted. The records suggest otherwise. One by one, everything collapsed. Family members who had refused to speak to me suddenly understood what had really happened. My aunt quietly wiped away tears. Uncle David looked completely shocked. Even cousins who had ignored my calls looked embarrassed. For years, they had believed my parents. No one had ever asked for proof. No one had questioned the story. They simply accepted it. Now they watched that lie fall apart in front of everyone. Then something unexpected happened. The judge asked my mother one final question. Mrs. Carter, why? The room became silent again. My mother closed her eyes. For several seconds, she couldn't answer. Finally, she whispered, because Emily reminded my husband of his first business failure. Everyone looked confused. She continued, when Emily was born, Robert lost nearly everything financially. He blamed that year for ruining his dreams. Over time, he started believing Emily brought bad luck. My father immediately shouted, "That's not true." But my mother kept talking. "No, it is true. You blamed her for everything that went wrong." My father said nothing. His silence answered the question better than words ever could. Daniel looked toward me. "Would you like to say anything?" I slowly stood. I looked directly at both of them. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would scream, cry, demand revenge. Instead, my voice remained calm. I spent my entire life trying to earn your love. I thought if I worked harder, if I became successful, if I sacrificed enough, you would finally treat me like your daughter. I paused. But today I understand something. You never rejected me because of who I was. You rejected me because of who you chose to become. No one spoke. Not even Ethan. The judge issued his decision. Every fraudulent transfer was reversed. The trust assets were restored. The inheritance was divided according to my grandparents' original estate plan. The court also ordered repayment of legal costs connected to the fraudulent claims. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about restoring the truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Our family's legal battle had attracted local attention because of the forged documents. Microphones surrounded us. One reporter asked, "Emily, do you feel like you finally won today?" I smiled gently. "No." She looked surprised. "I didn't win today. I simply stopped losing." Weeks later, life slowly became peaceful again. I moved into the small lake house Grandpa had left me years earlier. Not because it was expensive, because it was home. Every morning I drank coffee on the porch. Every evening I watched the sunset over the water. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt safe. One afternoon, a letter arrived. It was from Ethan. I almost threw it away. Instead, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. Emily, I spent years believing everything Mom and Dad told me. I wanted the inheritance. I wanted their approval. I never realized what it cost you. I'm sorry. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope someday you'll remember me as the brother I should have been. I folded the letter. I didn't answer. Some apologies deserve acknowledgement, not reconciliation. Months later, Grandpa's old attorney invited me to his office. There was one final instruction, he said. He handed me a small wooden box. Inside was Grandpa's favorite pocket watch. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Emily, if you're reading this, it means the truth finally found its way home. Never measure your worth by people willing to lie about you. Measure it by the person you choose to become after the lies are exposed. Love, Grandpa. I held the letter against my chest. For the first time since he passed away, I cried. Not from pain, from peace. A year later, I started a nonprofit legal assistance fund. Its purpose was simple: helping people who faced financial abuse inside their own families. Every case reminded me why I never gave up. Sometimes, the greatest inheritance isn't money. It's becoming the person who refuses to continue someone else's cycle of cruelty. Looking back, people often ask me what the DNA test actually changed. The answer surprises them. The DNA test didn't prove who I was. I already knew that. It exposed who everyone else had become. And once the truth came into the light, no lie was powerful enough to survive it. My parents tried to erase me with one sentence. One DNA test erased every lie they ever told. They thought they were taking away my inheritance. Instead, they gave me something far more valuable: my freedom.